segue point about a
I
little
think all
further.
the redacted stuff starts in like
Third
the
section.
third
Yeah, you're
section.
right. So we're skipping ahead a little bit, but we might as well just talk about it since we're talking about it. We have this poem, Seven Testimonies, and redacted in parentheses.
And some of this you can see that the way that this is another good thing about Grey Wolf, where they do the book design on the inside cover of the book, you see the actual redacted manuscripts, at least partial, some of them, which is cool. It's just a cool little art design to have in a poetry book, you know.
Yeah, I wonder, are those the actual redacted ones or are those his redacted ones? Like where he.
I think those are
Yeah,
his
yeah, okay.
redacted ones. So it's like the transcript, but it's like
But
his
he blacked
redactions.
out
So
parts to. Yeah, okay.
right. So if you look at the first one there, it says, "I woke up, asked why, my children, my wife, my leg." Same thing as the
So I
beginning
don't think we need to
of
read all of these. So I'll just.
no.
So from Seven Testimonies, redacted. I woke up. I asked why. My children, my wife, my leg. Outside, my head, cold, rainy. A tent, there were others. I heard my brother, a pipe, cold, water at night. They let me go once, my hands always laughing. That one I would say might be the one that works the best.
Yeah, and you can tell my thing with erasures, and like we were talking a little bit about this as we read through it this week with it's I know there's like a craze. There was a craze even a few years ago of people being obsessed with erasures.
Yeah, it got hot in the
Mainly
2010s,
because
I would say.
yeah, and I always say mainly I would say because erasures are easier.
I think they're like a fun practice, and I think they can be especially fun if you're doing something like visual. Like if you are like a visual artist who's doing something with language, like they can be uh, fun. And it's always interesting, of course, to back yourself into any corner to try to make something happen, right?
Yeah,
It's a way to see what you can make with what little you have. But I always wonder in those cases that more often than not, I see poems like this, especially the ones where you can kind of see what was blacked out a little bit still. Right? Some people do that, and I can't point to any specific one. It's like I've seen them. Whether it was like a friend who did it or if it was like in some journal I was reading. Uh,
well, I just mean so
where
if I
it's
take a
so
sentence,
dependent. It can be so dependent on the thing that's been erased to make the poem make meaning. Where if you
right?
like take away my knowledge that it was built from this other thing, if you like removed that from the page entirely, if you removed it from the notes, would this still have any meaning to me? And
And that's because I guess you're talking about the way it's printed. So it is printed as if it's not an erasure
yeah, in this
on the
case,
actual
sometimes
pages.
like I've seen them where you have an erasure poem where you see the blackout,
Right.
like the inside
Right.
of this cover.
And that's easier to do now in like the digital age
Yeah.
than it would have been. Well, even like 10, 12 years ago. But yeah, my thing with that is like so if I take a sentence and I cut out every word but the article the, you know, to like move along. With an erasure, it's kind of just like, okay, like, like, oh,
Yeah.
the,
It,
the. I cut out every word of this sentence but the because I needed to move along, kind of thing, and I'm just like, I mean, it's not like there's a correct answer or not, but I do. I don't know. I guess I've always just kind of had a little issue with erasure poems.
I think it all just there's always something that you think, could this have worked better? Like if he had played more maybe with like the actual language of the testimonies and wrote and I'm sure there are people that would say like that's really risky, like can you repurpose that, which like here he already has, can you pretend to be the voice of one of the people giving these testimonies that endured this torture. So you're gonna have somebody who thinks that's not okay, of course, and like maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not here to decide that, but do I think it would have made a better poem had he been a little more playful and taken more liberties in terms of like building it from the ground up himself and maybe borrowing from that language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then you run into the problem that we already talked about, which is how much outside. So if we're relying on what's blacked out to give us context into the meaning of these poems, it can be a problem because it's not. I guess it's not technically outside the poem, but like it is.
Yeah, I mean,
because we've redacted it and removed it to create the poem, kind of thing. I don't know. I guess I always just had an issue with erasures because it always just feels a little cheap to me. Like a little like, well, if I take a Shakespeare play and start
crossing shit out,
redacting lines, like, is that the same thing as composing poet? Like it just, as a reoccurring theme, at least for me on this podcast, I'm always, we're broadening and broadening to meaninglessness. And it's not that erasure is an illegitimate form, but it's kind of like, I would say, the lowest.
The thing is, I think I found the actual testimonies more compelling than I found the poems.
Right, so almost distracting from like what you've composed, kind of thing.
Yeah, and and they're not like super brief. Like they're short. The testimonies are short. And they're in the back of the book. You can read them. It will take you longer to read them than it will to read the poem, of course. And there are lines that are like, in the 7th one, it begins, "My eyesight is fading. In a few years, I will be blind." That's fucking arresting, right? Like,
yeah.
And it's really disturbing. I mean, they're unsettling, right? Of course, they're testimonies of people who were tortured. But yeah, this is just one of those cases where I feel like it's not there for me yet. I want more from these poems to feel like they're actually, doing something here and making real use of the thing that it's borrowing from.
Yeah, and if you didn't know, because that it was like erasure poems, how does that change the reading? Because when I first read this, I didn't know they were erasures.
Yeah, right. Like, and you wouldn't. You have to go to the back of the book to know that.
Right.
So how does that change the reading for you? Like, what did you think of this poem the first time you read it, not knowing?
I liked it better once I knew the context.
Right, because there's very little to ground you here. Like, you don't really know. Other than the fact that it says 7 testimonies, it's like, well, that's referring to something. What the fuck is it referring to? You don't know that until you read in the back of the book. And without it, it's really hard to place. It's really hard to sort of ground yourself in these poems, and it's hard to make sense of these poems. And you get a sense of urgency, and you get a sense of despair, but you don't get much else.